Been a challenging year in many respects, of course. Globally, we're dealing with wars in Gaza and Ukraine. Here at home, we have a divided Congress with members of the same party battling it out. And oh, by the way, there's a presidential election in less than a year. We want to welcome back some very familiar faces to our program. Jeff Mason is the White House correspondent for Reuters, and Joey Garrison is the White House correspondent for USA Today. I want to start with the economy, because obviously at this time of the year, everybody's checking the pocketbooks, assessing where they are, where they want to be. There has been good news on the economy of late. Yeah. But when you look at the polling, the voters say not so much. How concerned is the White House right now about the fact, Joey and Jeff, that while the data says things are heading in the right direction, the voters are still saying, I think the economy is not where it needs to be? Yeah,
it's been incredibly frustrating for the White House. There's been strong economic growth. There was 5.2% increase in GDP last month. The jobs unemployment, or the unemployment rate is at a 50-year low. And they have a lot of successes to tout that the White House does, President Biden does, and they do that, but they aren't getting credit. And the main reason is because of lingering inflation, particularly food prices. And I think there's just a feeling among American voters right now that the economy is not strong, and until that inflation changes in a way that people really feel, I think that the economy is still going to be a liability for the president.
Jeff, there was a moment during the Obama administration where they decided to embrace the criticism of health care reform and call it Obamacare themselves.
Yeah.
This White House has tried to do that with the economy, and they tried to coin the phrase Bidenomics to describe their economic plan. How has that worked or not worked in its implementation? Because it does seem to get some cacklings from folks when they call it Bidenomics.
Yeah, I mean, it's not working out for them in terms of the polls. They are selling President Biden's economic agenda, and they have legitimately a lot to sell. As Joey was saying, the numbers economically are pretty good. Inflation even has come down. The problem is prices are still high, and so Americans are still feeling that in their pocketbooks. And they have branded it as Bidenomics, and I think you'll still see them do that next year. But I think you'll also see them start focusing a little bit more on the other guy.
One of the things we hear from economists when we bring in economists to talk about this, they say typically there is a lag. There is a lag between the actual economic data and then the consumer perception of that data. Could that work in the White House's favor as we're heading into an election year in 2024?
Well, if there is a lag, it would certainly work out well for them, because then people would start feeling better about the economy maybe next summer. But, I do wonder at some point whether they might stop embracing this Bidenomics tag. I think it's very risky when it becomes sort of a punchline for voters thinking that the prices are high. I mean, when I talk to voters, that's kind of the first thing they say when I mention the phrase Bidenomics. But, outside of, they're going to have to make that calculation soon. And it also puts Democrats who are running in Senate and House races in a bad spot if they're having to defend an economy that people aren't feeling great about.
Well, especially because 40 years ago Democrats coined the phrase Reaganomics, and it was not in a complimentary fashion in which they were using that term. I want to move to all of the moving pieces that's going on the foreign stage right now. You've got this war in Ukraine, which we were about to round the curve of 2 years of the Russian invasion, but at the same time now we have Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza. Just one of these situations would have been a handful for a White House. This White House is now dealing with two, and I'm not even going to get into what's going on in Asia right now. How has the White House tried to navigate these dual crises and still maintain the message that both of these situations are in the U.S. interest to be a player and not to be on the sidelines?
Well, the large part of the answer to that question is they've tried to combine them in discussing it in terms of funding and in terms of asking Congress to provide money to both sides, saying that these are international crises that are about right and wrong, about democracy, about U.S. values, and wanting to use that messaging as a way to encourage particularly some skeptical Republicans to throw money to Ukraine.
Here domestically, Joey, as you've pointed out, it's also opened up some fissures in our political landscape. On the Democratic side, you have some, left-wing Democrats saying that, they're uncomfortable with the U.S.'s aid platform that it's been giving to Israel. On the right, you have Republicans saying that they don't want any more aid to Ukraine. Does it show where we're at here politically amongst ourselves, not just what's going on in those foreign countries?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we are in a divided country, and it's a almost evenly split House of Representatives. And, we are seeing that, as you mentioned, with different factions opposing elements of both continued Ukraine and continued Israel funding. I mean, for President Biden, he really needs a united Democratic front heading into this election year. And so, the far-left progressives who are opposing aid to Israel and opposing President Biden's stance and kind of unabashed support right now for Israel, he risks, having a real political setback if he can't get those groups all united before the election.
Jeff, you've done some reporting on the big what-if question about 2024. That is, what if, for whatever reason, Joe Biden winds up not being the nominee, either through age or for some other decision? You had reported that there doesn't really seem to be a plan B here for the Democrats.
That's right. There's really not a plan B. Polling shows that Americans are unhappy about both big candidates. They're unhappy about Joe Biden. They're unhappy about Donald Trump. The overall likelihood is that both of those men will be facing each other. If President Biden, who is 81, were for some reason next year not to be able to finish his race, there's not really a plan B. But there are rules that the Democratic Party has for choosing an alternative candidate, and it would just depend on when that would happen. If he were to drop out before the convention, then the convention would be a so-called open convention where all of the delegates that he'd accrued could decide to vote for somebody else. And then it would be a pretty messy process for the Democrats. But it's important to emphasize he's not planning to drop out. He's in good health, and he wouldn't have been running for re-election if he didn't intend to go all the way.
At the same time, though, we saw this thing at the end of November, which was the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, debating the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, who actually is running for president. So what do we make of that? Was that, Gavin Newsom kind of dipping a toe in the water? Or is that basically, an opportunity for Ron DeSantis to raise his profile in a race that seems to be stuck in the mud?
Well, I think it was that for both of those governors. And for Governor Newsom, in 2028, I think we can certainly expect he will be among Democrats seeking the nomination. As for the more immediate 2024, I think he wants his name out there, but he also wants to be a good, loyal Democrat for President Biden. And so as he was debating, DeSantis was sticking up for the president. I think he got good marks from the White House for that.
So we talked a lot about Joe Biden here. We had not talked about Donald Trump yet, so let's not forget about him. Obviously, he enters this race in a very different place than he entered the first time he ran for office. He is facing 91 felony counts against him right now. What is the minefield of both the courts and the campaign that Donald Trump has to walk through if he hopes to walk back through the doors of 1600 Pennsylvania?
Well, I think the courts are the bigger minefield. From a campaign perspective, in the last time he ran, he was not the prohibitive frontrunner the way he is now. And it is prohibitive in terms of his polling. But those question marks over the legal charges are real, and he will have to juggle both going to court, showing up in person at court for these various different trials, and trying to campaign at the same time. So far, we have seen that actually only help President Trump, former President Trump, in terms of his polling. But the logistics of that and making that work in 2024 will be really tricky.
Well, and there's the possibility that he's actually convicted. I mean, that is going into totally uncharted territory at that point.
Is it safe to say, though, that the Democrats want to run against nobody else in 2024 but Donald Trump?
Well, I think so, yeah. I mean, even though Trump is leading Biden in a lot of polls in a hypothetical matchup, it's still the closest there. And I think when you talk to Democrats, they're really trying to take some of these bad polling of Biden with a grain of salt. At the end of the day, they like the contrast that a Biden versus Trump matchup sets up.
That's a good point. Joey Garrison from USA Today, Jeff Mason from Reuters. We appreciate both of you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
We'll talk to you real soon. We'll be